I remember you talking about other girls that were my age, and he would talk about how old they were.
Oh,
and I was like,
old.
there's just no hope for me.
You played your age down a lot. You kind of like acted young and foolish.
I still feel young at heart.
You still got some energy.
Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I am Jen and this is Fundie Fridays, and here on my channel I talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism, pop culture, American conservative politics, and gay stuff. And right now I am currently recovering from bronchitis, so that's why I have the lovely husky voice of, you know, Kathleen Turner or somebody like that. It's also the reason why I have the microphone right directly in my mouth. It's because it's like I can't get much out of my throat. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Today, we are going to be talking about Girl Defined. Once again, I just can't quit these bitches. And it's because they don't quit either.
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
I mean, everybody's talking about Girl Defined. I mean, that's not a bad thing, because I'm pretty sure it was somebody very smart and pretty who said this.
Making fun of Girl Defined is a party and everyone's invited.
And I'll have you know, I wasn't even going to make this fourth installment until later this year, but Bethy had to drop the most offensive video of all time. Yeah, we will be talking about that disaster of a video towards the end of this video. But before we do all that, I know I make this joke every single video. Bethy, this is how you make passive income.
And once again, Fundie Fridays is proudly brought to all of you by Casetify, the world's most trusted brand for mobile cases and accessories. You all can go to casetify.com/Fundie Fridays right now and save 15% off of your next order. Now I know that all of you today are eager to go ahead and get Girl Defined, but we're all going to need to take a second to get Case Defined, if you know what I mean. And today, we're taking it back to basics with the Casetify Impact Case, the perfect do-it-all case for whatever season of life you're in. The signature features of a Casetify Impact Case are the EcoShock bumpers, which provide top-quality mobile protection without sacrificing any sleekness or form factor. Make no mistake though, these cases still bring all the same phone-honoring mobile drop security we've come to expect from Casetify. 8.2 feet of drop protection at 4 times the military standard, and that's all while being made of 65% recycled materials. And if you still find yourself wrestling with your faith in the Casetify Impact Case, don't worry, they can back it up with an evidence-based drop test. Alright. There you go. And now,
Cool.
And of course, the Casetify Impact Case still gives you access to the thousands upon thousands of prints, patterns, and customizations that Casetify is known for. Here are some of my favorites. I like this one because it's so detailed and because I love a good Japanese monster movie. I like this one because it reminds me of the beach, and also of a Windows 98 screensaver, both of which are things that relax me. And I like this one because it's got angels in heaven on it, obviously. It's even got God's rainbow right here in the corner. So once again, thank you so much to Casetify for sponsoring this video, and remember, you all can go to casetify.com/Fundie Fridays right now and save 15% off of your next order. And now, back to Girl Disconcerted.
Girl Defined specifically is a channel or a ministry, as they like to think of it, run by Kristen and Bethany, who are two sisters, and they are part of this big Quiverful family from Texas. I can't remember how many siblings there are, like maybe 9. And they're all extremely tall. Most of the girls are bleach blonde. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just painting a picture for you. And they used to run in the IBLP and Vision Forum circles. I mean, so much so that Kristen recently interviewed Ginger Volo, and I made a video about that. But yeah, they're kind of a powerhouse in this community, I guess. They used to make a lot of videos about, you know, keeping yourself pure and how to properly be biblically feminine and all that kind of stuff. And now they've kind of shifted into a lot of like sex stuff, which is a part of a greater trend that I've been noticing. I mean, every everybody's doing it. Paul and Morgan especially have been doubling down on the sex stuff. Pretty much all the Christian influencers, once they get married, want to talk about sex. And then they all want to simultaneously complain about how it's the church's fault that married adults don't have good sex. And they fail to realize that they were and still are a part of that big purity culture machine.
So I thought it would be really interesting to talk about those of us who grew up in purity culture and some of the negative impacts that it's having on marriages today. Now, don't get me wrong, or don't hear me when what I want to say, I'll just say it. I think that God calls us to purity, ultimately a heart that desires to honor him above all else. He calls us to, ultimately save sex for marriage. He calls us to honor the marriage covenant. There are a lot of things he does call us to, but I think some of us got hung up on the idea that there were specific rules that made us godly or not, that made us pure or not, when the Bible was kind of vague in those areas. So yes, we all have to come up with boundaries as single people, as dating people.
The thing that I find the most interesting about that is not only do none of them realize that they were harmed by purity culture, and they're so afraid to say that because that would undermine the other things they've taught, that they just won't admit it, or maybe it's too painful for them. I don't know. But it's purity culture is that reason. It's very cut and dry. You can see where one starts and how we got there, because you're literally telling people, mostly girls in the church, that they are sinful and disgusting for even having a body, let alone acting on their sexual feelings, and that their virginity is pretty much their entire self-worth. They get compared to chewed pieces of bubble gum, and you're giving pieces of your heart away. And what's this new one? Soul ties. It's all very disgusting, and it's very harmful, and it causes a lot of problems because, you go from being completely hands off, literally, completely frigid, to getting married, having your first kiss, having your first everything. Bethy talks about, well, where do we get all these extra rules from, and what positions are good and what positions are sinful, and just this type of discussion. And it's well, it's because of you guys, not Girl Defined specifically, but the entire genre of Christian influencers who talk about sex. It's because of y'all.
Don't have sex, save sex for marriage. Wait. That's the message many of us heard growing up. And then we get married and we're like, okay, so is this what I waited all this time for? Sex can be so difficult and beautiful and challenging and confusing all at the same time. And many of us just feel where do I go for answers? Where do I actually go for help? Unfortunately, in the Christian community especially, there has been a lot of silence around this issue, especially with women. And so a lot of married women feel like sex is more of a duty rather than a delight and something that they really look forward to. And especially when it comes to the childbearing years and having young kids, it's sex just seems like an extra burden rather than something that energizes and that you look forward to. And I want to change all of this. I want to help us as Christian women enjoy, delight, get excited about sex. And that's why I've created the Ultimate Sex Course for Christian Women. I brought together the best therapists, doctors, psychologists to bring this course to you.
And especially if you think about all the young people that were watching their channel and looking up to them, it's really upsetting. So
another thing that I think of is that, we can look on at purity culture or the purity movement tones in a lot of these books, and we say, wow, I do not like the way that you said that, or I do not like the way that you presented purity, or the way that you presented this idea of relationships. And because we don't like their tone or the way someone is presenting something, we say, well, I'm going to kind of ditch the whole biblical model behind that because I don't like the way that you're talking. And so I think instead of saying, okay, I don't really like the way that you're talking, so I'm going to ditch everything, look a little deeper and say, is there any truth? Is there anything that should be held on to? Should I take anything that actually comes from the Bible with me and leave the other stuff behind? But
it's just funny that they're trying to distance themselves from the prudes and the older generation when look in a mirror, right?
We've just come up with these ideas on our head that there are certain things that are Christian and there are certain things that are not, which I even when it comes to lingerie, it's oh my gosh, you'll give someone some lingerie or you'll, share about it and they're oh my gosh, that's just too much. And I'm too much? You're about to get naked. What are we talking about? Or when it comes to certain moves or positions or this whole idea of pole dancing or learning how to lap dance or whatever, it's we've somehow come up with this box in our mind. Okay, this is good Christian sex, and then anything outside of that is no, that's evil. That's like of the devil. That's like terrible, you know?
But it's obvious that their beliefs are so easily shaken, perhaps, that they're afraid to analyze them at all. You know, if we start to question purity culture, then that might mean we're deconstructing, you know, and that's basically, they'd probably rather you worship Satan than deconstruct in their community, you know. But it really is just like they don't want to, they very much heavily believe in the slippery slope fallacy. So I can see how they would be like, oh, if I deconstruct this one thing, disentanglement or whatever Ginger said, then that will mean that I'll have to start questioning all these other beliefs, and that's just the worst thing that could possibly happen. So you've got this cognitive dissonance where they're like, why am I so harmed by purity culture, yet why do I keep defending it? You know, because it makes money probably, but also like they don't want to admit that they're wrong, or like that they possibly could have been harmed by it. Like Bethy has said recently, like, yeah, purity culture might have hurt some people, but we need those boundaries. Like, I've seen Bethy say, you know, I want to be a resource for Christians who have these sex issues because I don't want them to go to secular culture and learn about it. Implying once again, there is a right and wrong way.
And, you know, there are some people in the chat who are mentioning like it's the church's fault, we're struggling so much. And I agree in the sense, I'm not going to say it's the church's fault. I think that it's such a hard topic, sadly. I don't know why it's a hard topic to talk about sex. Yeah. I think it's balance of like, yes, sex with your husband, with your wife needs to be private in a lot of ways, but not so private that you literally never talk about it. And not so, I think we're afraid that if we talk about sex, we're going to lead people into stumbling or into temptation. And I get that. And I agree that there has to be a balance, but the church, I think, and a lot of people, Christians, have gone so far to the other side of just not talking about it at all that it's damaged people, and like we've forgotten to talk about the freedom that sex is within marriage and the fun that it is and the beauty that it is. And so yeah, like I pray that the church, that pastors, we find a way to talk about it in an honorable way, in a beneficial way, in an educational way, without, you know, causing people to stumble, obviously.
And it's just crazy coming from these broads who literally won't even masturbate. Like, and apparently Kristen had a real big problem with these romance novels because she talked about it all the time. And like, you know, good for you. I'm very pro touching yourself. Like, come on. And so it's just so wild that this is happening. And then like in 1 minute they're complaining that they're not coming, and the other they're saying don't touch yourself. But then another one they say it's okay to like try a toy if it like teaches you how to orgasm with your partner. And it's just like, this is, you talk about the liberals confusing people. Bitch, I'm confused. What is a Christian married woman such as myself supposed to do here?
I would basically view it like, all right, Dave, it's your job to make me come alive, and I'm like coming like these dead dry bones, and he's like, all right, how am I going to raise the dead tonight, you know? And it's just so horrible.
Like, there are legitimate problems and like physical issues that people have because of purity culture. It's not just a mental thing, which the mental thing is a huge part of it. You know, your brain is the most sexual organ. Like, without it, it wouldn't be any fun. So it's just like, they're making light of these problems, it seems, and especially because they're not talking to any actual doctors. They're talking to like half-baked sexologists, which we'll get to, I promise.
So that's kind of like a tangent, but
yeah,
I don't know. I hate to like categorize men and women different, but it's like women have kind of given themselves this reputation, and you see it all over the internet, of just being like less desiring. And I think we just are perpetuating that problem by giving into it, rather than going like, no, naturally I might not feel like I'm desiring, but I can change that, and I'm going to do what it takes to heal my hormones and, you know, think differently so that I can become a really sensual, erotic woman.
Many people, you know, Christians included, after they get married, when they've been raised in this culture, they have problems with pain, low self-worth, unsatisfactory sex, and it's like anguishing for them. And then they're just like, well, buy my course. Buy my $12 PDF that I plagiarized from somebody else, and then you'll be able to come. I'm assuming she's just saying read the Bible or whatever, and she's not saying like, okay, use your tongue in this direction, because I just can't imagine that. And I'm just trying to be real here. Like, it seems like Bethy was the president of the Virginity Rocks Club, and she's been coasting on that ever since. So, Bethy's been on this journey of sexual healing. And unfortunately, she's been bringing us all along with her. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Bethy is not an expert on anything. I appreciate that she says that. Just acknowledging something is not enough to fix a problem.
I never claim to be a sex expert. I am very open that we're learning and growing. And that's why I'm constantly recommending resources and pointing you to people that I trust, that I've learned from, that he's learned from. So, yeah.
I would have more of a problem with it if you were trying to come across as some sort of expert but the fact that you're more of a curator trying to bring along resources that are helping you, that's
okay.
Sure, Bethy, you're not an expert. You're just curating people to spread your message. You're like the DJ Khaled of Fundies. But the people that you are bringing on your show that you're calling experts are also misinformed and dangerous. When you bring people on your show that only know biblical counseling and one couple who straight up violated their child's bodily autonomy, you're making the situation worse for anyone that actually listens to you in earnest. Honestly, if you're a Christian or just anybody alive on earth, you would be better off listening to any random cat than you would these nut jobs. You know what? I'll just hold my daughter while I talk about sex on camera, just like Bethy does, okay? And we'll see how many more clicks I get. Because of this journey that she's been on, Bethy's been doing a lot more content with Dave. They recently released this podcast, Our Most Open Marriage Conversation Yet, where they talk about their marriage struggles and also biblical counseling, and it really shed quite a light on the inner workings of their relationship.
But because Bethany does talk a good bit about sex, it indirectly does reflect on me in our sexual relationship, and it challenges my needy desire to be thought of as competent and strong. So something she says could expose me as sexually inadequate, or cause people to question, like, oh, what kind of a sex life do they have?
Make me come alive, and I'm like coming like these dead dry bones. And he's like, all right, how am I going to raise the dead tonight?
How good is he in bed? Does he even have what it takes? All of those things that I would question about myself. Of course, I project onto, well, that's what other people could think of. But the awesome thing about that is this creates an opportunity for me to face that in myself. And that at the end of the day, my sexual adequacy is not something worth keeping around or focusing on. In fact, that's something that I'm trying to move away from, is that whole mindset altogether. So the exposure via Bethany talking about sex and herself and our relationship is very exposing in that sense, or at least it seems to be exposing to me. And that is an awesome opportunity for me to basically challenge myself where I'm weak, which is what other people think. How am I going to deal with that and handle that myself? Am I going to get my sense of adequacy from what other people think, even from what Bethany thinks? Or am I going to have that self-contained inside me, where I can be around people, even people who think less of me, and still retain my form and my shape, and move into the world with confidence, regardless of how other people might view me. So it's just an awesome opportunity to confront that.
I think maybe they are sacrificing a part of themselves, like vulnerability and their privacy, because they want to help others. Like, that's the only way that they can justify that, right? Maybe it's because of the shame and the guilt that they feel from the church. Perhaps they think this is like a way to be accountable. Like, that's a big thing in their culture, right? So they confess to all this stuff, or like, maybe if they show you how much they've been suffering, it will bring others to Christ. Like, I'm just really trying to think of a logical reason why they would be saying this kind of stuff, because to anybody else, this is very embarrassing or painful. But like, I just can't imagine putting it online, especially because they know that it's going to be ripped to shreds. So I don't know. It makes sense why Dave feels the way he does about Bethy talking about their sex life.
I'll just speak personally. I got to a point basically 4 years into our marriage where I just kind of hit a big wall of disappointment and went to get counseling. Mostly thinking you should get counseling. I was mostly thinking really Bethany should get counseling. But I'm going to lead in this and make it about me and my issues. And it turned out to be a lot about me and my issues after all.
But then I did go get counseling.
But
too.
then you did go get counseling. She did go get counseling.
Yeah.
So, there's multiple different levels of how that worked out.
Yeah.
So all this brings me to Bethy's insistence that Dave go to biblical counseling with her. Now, from what I've been able to tell, they go to two separate counselors and maybe one together, but there's two different people.
I would recommend, this is my personal recommendation, I got counseling through the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors, ACBC. I'll link them below. I mean, I think we link them in every podcast, but you can literally search Association of Certified Biblical Counselors, and you can find a list of their recommended counselors that are trained through them, and they're all going to be like biblically based. And I think that, they don't come from that like victim mentality at all. And they're just incredible. So that's
they don't let you.
They don't let you just be like, ooh, like, it's not like talk therapy at all. It's
I used to kind of hate the biblical counseling world.
You did.
I used to, yeah. And it's not that I 100% agree with the paradigm, but I have realized through my own work and development that it's not all bad to just tell someone like, hey, you need to like get a hold of yourself and stop treating yourself like you're freaking defeated all the time.
Yeah,
all that.
They're pretty straightforward, pretty black and white, pretty much like, here's what the Bible says, deal with it.
Get on it. Yeah, the more it's kind of in like a circle, coming back, and being like, maybe there is something to, just like treating someone like they can make a change rather than always sort of catering to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, they definitely challenge you and force you to like.
I've never taken it myself, but Bethany has there's this woman that Bethany's seen, and she sounds like
she's so
like
great.
A joy. She sounds like a lot of fun. And I met her.
Yeah.
She seemed like a really, really fun, free individual, which I appreciate that.
And we're going to go to dinner with them, her husband.
And we're going to dinner.
Her husband.
So total, complete freaking bombshell brain blast. I was under the impression that Dave was going to a biblical counselor who was also a licensed therapist, because he had mentioned EMDR, which we'll get into in a minute. And I had a whole rant built up about how, shame on that counselor for sullying the good name of evidence-based therapy. And I really did have a whole thing about that. But I did not realize until I just listened to this clip again, Dave said that he does not have a biblical counselor, but he supports Bethy's.
Yeah, I've never taken it myself, but...
So, holy shit, I think Dave is not going to a biblical counselor. I think he's going to a real therapist. So, yeah, kind of shame on me for, about to include that in the video about, fuck Dave's therapist. I think he actually might be a real therapist. Oh my God. But I will not change my opinion on Bethy's counselor, because Bethy's counselor is a quack. She is just some lady. And you can even hear when Dave said, she's got a lovely businesswoman that she talks to. And they go out to dinner, which I want to be very clear that a real licensed therapist cannot go to dinner with you. That is illegal.
I think that, they don't come from that like victim mentality at all. And they're just incredible. So that's
they don't let you.
They don't let you just be like, ooh, like it's not like talk therapy at all. It's
I used to kind of hate.
Also, since I had to kind of redo my rant about Dave and his biblical counseling, because of the new information I found out, I'm just going to tell you guys this as a voiceover. It is absolute bullshit what they're saying about therapy, aka real therapy, aka licensed professional therapy. Like saying that you go in there and they reinforce the victim mentality and it's horrible, and all they do is make you feel bad about yourself and baby you and blow smoke up your ass. Like, what are you guys talking about, first of all? Second of all, it really shines a light on how awful your counseling is, where they're telling you to like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stop feeling bad for yourself. Like, that sounds awful. It sounds like you guys paid money to go to some Christian lady who made you feel bad about yourself. Like, wow, that really sucks for you. I guess you're also a victim in that sense. This is just awful, and I just wanted to point it out that like this conversation that they were having inspired much of this video. It's so shocking. I would report their therapist to the board, but there is no board, and this is all completely legal. I guess they just suffer. No, they suffer, and then they tell their audience bad advice based on the junk counseling that they got from some lady at church. Yep, that's what it is. This brutally honest portrayal of a struggling marriage between two millennials in purity culture is pretty shocking. Not shocking in the way like I didn't expect this to happen, but shocking like, holy shit, why are you saying this on the internet?
29, I am a motion designer, I'm an amateur musician, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and about a year ago, I realized I didn't like my life, and I didn't like myself. When I left home at the age of 20, all I wanted was to be liked, to be appreciated, to have attractive people think that I'm attractive, and so I spent about 9 years of my life chasing that. 3 years into my marriage, and I'm miserable. I blamed my wife, it wasn't her fault. I blamed my parents, of course, it wasn't their fault. There was really only one answer. I had driven myself to deny my integrity and hide my flaws, because anything that threatened people's approval in my life had to go. I was choosing to be a coward, and deep down, I knew it. I was suppressing my life energy by adapting myself to what I thought other people wanted from me. I was emotionally manipulative and controlling in my marriage, and ultimately ineffective and undesirable. So I've been making some changes. For the past 6 months or so, I've been confronting myself in various areas of my life, and I've realized something. Living my life for the approval of other people is a ridiculous waste. So that means I have to actually build a life. That's what I'm working on. I can feel my life energy is no longer suppressed. I am expanding outward, and I'm just getting started. So, what if for the rest of your life, your personal development froze at the level it is today? You can't grow anymore for the rest of your life. Now think about this. You can grow for the rest of your life.
Case in point, Dave's bizarre Instagram live where he plays 40 minutes of piano music, then drops some pretty hardcore confessions about his relationship.
And then it started to get worse, and I started to have these suicidal fantasies. They call it passive suicidal ideation, where you're not really about to end your life, but you are fantasizing about it. Hey Jude, don't be afraid.
Gee whiz, I don't think I remember this scene from Inside.
And I like the word fantasy, because my fantasy had to do not really with me being so feeling so worthless necessarily. That probably was in there somewhere. But what made my fantasy compelling was how bad Bethany would feel if I were no longer here. And that I had some moments where those suicidal fantasies were more dramatic, and that's when I basically decided I need to do something about this. And so I went and got some therapy. Wonderful therapist.
I don't want to shame him or judge him for having suicidal thoughts, because you can't help that, and it's very serious, and I'm glad that he talked to a therapist about it. What I'm just shocked about is the fact that he put that on the internet. I can't imagine how Bethy feels. That would just break my heart and make me question so many things about my relationship. I just, like, it seems cruel. Like, you don't have to keep that in your head. You don't have to suffer with that, Dave. And you definitely should tell somebody. But to tell not only your wife that thought is about, but to tell strangers on the internet. So, oh my God, I don't even know what to say. On behalf of Bethy, I'm sorry, but wow, don't do that. And in some cases, some of this stuff isn't our business, but I think it's my business when he makes a bunch of these fucked up statements like he did in this Instagram live. Okay, so today is the day of voiceovers, apparently. I went and looked on Dave's Instagram to see if he had made any follow-ups to this last live, and he did. He went on to say that Bethy was not abusing him, and it's not her fault that he had these ideations, and not to blame her, and that he's had suicidal ideations his whole life, and all that. And I appreciate him coming on and clarifying. The problem that I and most of us online that saw that video have with this is not, we don't think Bethy caused him to feel that way. That would be its own separate issue. The problem is, he said it was a fantasy of his because of how bad Bethy would feel afterwards. And I just think that is completely inappropriate and unnecessary to say in a public forum, knowing how badly that's going to hurt your wife.
One of the things that I think is important is to help clarify what I am saying and what I'm not saying about myself. I think there is a misconception, and I can take responsibility for not quite communicating in a way that gave the fullest picture, but I think there's a misconception that what I shared about having suicidal ideation, about difficulty managing my sense of self, a lot of that stuff, that was it wasn't brought about by Bethany. I just want to make that very, very clear, because I think there's a sense, a lot of times we, it's easy to view relationships as sort of having a hierarchy, like there's a victim and a victimizer, right? And while that holds true and is probably the closest and best interpretation for many relationships, it certainly, in my opinion, does not hold true for all relationships. But I think that a lot of times when we see certain things that fit into our categories of what we've come to think of or read about as toxic behavior, or in this case, suicidal ideation, what causes it and things like that, I think it's really easy to just kind of jump into, well, okay, we know who the players are. We know the victim is, he's the one who's having the thoughts, we know who the victimizer must be, because he's having these thoughts after they have difficult conversations. So whatever's going on in the relationship or the marriage, it's got to be, going at that, sort of that angle, victimizer, victim. And I'm here to say that is not the best interpretation, or in this case, a very good interpretation at all of the case.
Now we are finally going to talk about the worst thing that I've ever seen on a Girl Defined production, and that is Bethy's interview with this couple called The Hills. I'm refusing to call anybody a doctor here. It's like a normal video. I don't even give a shit about that part. They're talking about how none of them can come, right? It's a story we hear every time. This woman was convinced that she did not have a clitoris because reasons, right? She managed to have a child with this man. She was going around telling everybody this, her friends, her doctors, supposedly, and she was just convinced that she didn't have one. A friend, or getting a mirror, or reading a book, they did the unthinkable.
And again, actually, our oldest child had been born, which is a little girl.
Wow.
And eventually, Phyllis was changing our daughter's diaper, and our friend showed her on our little girl, where the clitoris is located, which was huge information for Phyllis. And again, it's stunning to me. That's pretty darn basic. And we're smart people, and we were clueless.
I cannot imagine doing that to a child. Whenever the couple was having these problems, there might not have been anatomically correct diagrams for them to look at. There might not have been, because historically, the clitoris was not included on these diagrams for the reasons that you think. You also need to remember the dark ages of gynecology, which were fueled by the barbaric and inhumane experimentations done on enslaved women. And I'm not saying I endorse what these people did at all. I think that they should be ashamed of themselves, and their child deserves a fucking class action lawsuit against them. I don't know. This situation got me so riled up that I had to make this episode. If I was in her situation, I would have rather whipped out the mirror or even bought a fucking nudie magazine from 7-Eleven than ever violate my child like that. I cannot fucking believe that they did that. What do you expect? They are the party of genital inspections. Oh, shit, I can't even say that anymore. Did you see what fucking Joe did with Title IX? And do I even need to mock this fake doctor's bogus qualifications? Although I'm pretty sure calling yourself a sexologist and not even knowing where the clit is probably a more obvious indication of your fake qualifications. None of these people are experts in jack shit. I wouldn't even call them being experts at being Christians. And if they're going to come up with the excuse, oh, well, we're just trying to teach to other Christians. Well, you shouldn't be. If you're a Christian, and I mean this wholeheartedly, you are better off talking to a imprint of Jesus on a piece of toast than you would ever be listening to any one of these three stooges. And Bethy, I know you're not the tallest bard in the bushel, but I know you've got some smarts in your pretty little head, and I know that this video was a ticking time bomb because you removed it about 5 seconds after it was uploaded. You have got to start vetting these people, and if you don't, then you need to be ready for the backlash when they say terrible shit like this. It makes me so frustrated that fundies do this shit, especially because all of their other political motivation seems to be for the kids, yet this happens, this violation. It seems to me at best, evangelicals consider children to be tiny adults who can be subjected to all the stress and difficulties of an adult without concern. And at worst, they consider children to be nothing more than property to be manipulated and exploited as they see fit. In conclusion, the current situation with Girl Defined and their movement from ultra-virginal pre-wives into married hornballs for Jesus feels and comes across as being just particularly irritating to the snark community. Personally, I think that's because of just how obviously it demonstrates the disingenuous nature of their whole operation. The snark community has been tailing these women for years now, in large part to just how clearly overt their toxicity and their smug piety were. They make it so easy to recognize and rip apart the negative effects that evangelical religion has on girls for whom it is subject. Gleefully sticking their feet in their mouths at least once a week, brand new deconstructors and diehard heretics alike could enjoy the hilarity/terror that is Girl Defined. And almost like clockwork, as the two transitioned into their new lives as someone's wives, the ladies and the content they produced seemed to be undergoing a werewolf-like transformation, almost as if overnight, the videos we all once watched to see horrifying evangelical purity ideals laid bare in the most direct way possible now instead showed us these same women telling us all how incredible sex is and how important it is to have sex all the time. We all knew it was coming, and yet it still comes across as exceptionally hypocritical. We knew that they were going to act like that once they got married, and once again, the women of Girl Defined never failed to disappoint. And yet, I don't think any of us expected them, or at least Bethy, to get this gross and strange about it. In the same brutally irritating way that they've always responded to criticism, mealy-mouthed half-acknowledgments of toxic evangelical ideology chased with enough apologism to numb the senses of even the most hardened snarker, they'll stare directly into a camera and tell you all the details of their sex life, blame the secular society that they hardly interact with, and all the while ignore the thick sludge of American Christian purity culture that surrounds them. And perhaps most irritatingly, it seems like these two are in fact going to further propagate the terrible lie that all sex is unholy and bad, and that a switch will flip in your brain when you enter God. What the fuck? This is too much. So not only are they flooding the market with gross descriptions of their sex lives, but they're also not even going to have the decency to address how their old views might have made things harder for them now. And furthermore, Bethy's most recent controversy shows us the floor for the girl-defined worldview may be even lower than we had originally suspected. The fact that she would willingly post an interview containing such disturbing statements shows clear as day the disconnect between her and the rest of the world at large. That what those two were describing was a gross violation of bodily autonomy. The fact that this wasn't obvious demonstrates just how little the bodies and lives of certain folks matter to this particular sect of Christianity. Children in particular, it seems, truly are just available for whatever kind of exploitation adults want to put on them. It's this kind of shit that keeps us all coming back to challenge and ridicule Girl Defined. Once again, the girl-defined girls get to pretend that they're better than everyone, flood the internet with more evangelical purity nonsense than it ever needed, and do so all seemingly with social impunity, the way that only the daughters of rich white people can. So that's what I have to say about that. This episode definitely is not what I expected it to be, but I hope you all like it. If I had to sum it up in even shorter words, girl-defined bad, Fundie Friday's good. Please subscribe. I will make another Girl Defined video later this year, of course, with all the other little things that I didn't touch in today's episode. Yes, so I hope you all enjoyed today's video. I developed a headache halfway through. I still have it, so I'm gonna go take some pills after this. But yeah, it's been a long fucking week. By the time you're watching this, the Plath video is already out, but that was a whole ordeal trying to get that out. Plus being sick and all that stuff. So, which I'm fine, obviously I recorded a video, but yeah, it just sucks. And what do y'all think about all this shit? How has purity culture affected you, and does it piss you off extra hard that they're pivoting into this stuff now because of it? That's what I want to know. If you like my content, remember to consensually smash that like and subscribe button. We say consensually because the subscribe button wants to be smashed. Just waiting for you to do it. And we have merch. We have stickers now. Lots of stickers of most of the designs that we have on the shirts. We have Patreon and YouTube memberships if you would like to give us money every month. And with that comes a few behind the scenes videos and 10% off of merch. And James was in a little short film with our friends, and that's available now. I will link to that in the description. But beforehand, here is a trailer for it. So I will play that, and then we'll be out of here. I love you guys very much. Please drink lots of water, and don't smoke, because I'm pretty sure that's how I got bronchitis. Anyway, yeah. See y'all later, and fuck Girl Defined.
It's happening again. I was sure it wouldn't. It's been years since I last saw it. And I'd convinced myself it was one of those fantastical things kids think they see.